Loops Part 2 Array Loops. In this lesson I will show you how to output the contents of an array by using a loop. The loop will go through each item and output it. This is much easier than calling each element in the array using its index. Instead, you can do this with these 3 lines of codes, and you can loop an array of any size. I will show you how to do this with the for loop. There are 2 methods of doing this. I created these 2 arrays so we can work with them. The first one is X. It's an int array. It has 8 items. The second one is Y. It's a string array. It has a few strings inside of it, ABC, foobar, etc, etc. The values doesn't matter. I'm just showing you how to do this. This will be very useful in the future, as all the things I show you in the basic videos. I just want you to know all the syntax. I want to go over all the syntax. Okay. To loop an array, we will need its length. The way you get the array's length is by writing the array name and dot length. Length is the attribute that holds the array's length. Let's run it and see what it will output. X length is 8. Let's give it a space so we can see it better. X length 8. It has 8 elements, but remember, we start counting from 0 to 7, so the index for the first one is 0, and the index for the last element in the array is 7. And that's why in the array, in the loop, we check if I is smaller or equals to the length minus 1. If we remove the minus 1, we will have an index out of bounds error, because in the last loop, the I will be equals to 8, which is out of bounds, but by using minus 1, we compare I to 7 instead of 8, and the loop will stop at 7, which is the exact length of the array. And as you can see, it's a normal for loop. You have the iterator, int I, and then you have the condition. Same condition as inside of the if argument, but here it's for a loop for multiple iterations of and multiple arguments that it changes. It gets incremented, and the last one is the increment. But basically this argument, logically wise, is the same as the ones inside an if argument. You can use this inside of an if. The compiler doesn't care, it's machine logic. But here we just check if I is smaller than 7, so the loop will only run for 7 times. If you don't remember what a for loop does, please go back a few lessons and rewatch the loops video. Inside the loop, we output X and then the start of a round bracket, a rectangular bracket, and then we add to it the number I, the int I, and then the closing rectangular bracket, and then an equal sign. This is not an argument. Java does not compile this because it's inside quotes. It's a string. And finally, we add to the whole string the element in the array we're currently looping. We call the array X, and then we call the index, and in the index we put the increment of the array. The first time it will loop, it will be 0, so the index will be 0, it will call 77. Here you can see it here, x in the index of 0, 77, and in the second iteration of the loop, the index is 1, so it's 34, which is correct. 34 is also the last element. As you can see, it stops at 7 when the index is 7, and the index is the iterator in this case. The iterator is representing the index. So each iteration is another position in the array. I styled it like that, so you will be able to see it, the whole thing, the name of the array and the index, the equal signs and all that. If you don't remember how to do this, I covered it in the variables. I had an example of building an output string using strings and ints with the plus operator, which is not plus in this case. Here it says indent or increment. It's not actually plus, it's just add to this string the value of this. As you can see, it outputs 0. It does not do any calculation with this string. And finally, we have something to separate to what we are going to write. This is all nice. This is how they usually teach you how to output an array using a for loop. It can be done with a while loop, but I find this to be, how shall I say it, not very elegant, not fast, not lazy enough for my taste. So in other programming languages, they call this a for each loop. In Java, we use the for keyword. It's actually a for loop, but its argument is a bit different than a usual for loop. It's meant only for arrays. The first thing we put in the argument, we create, let's say in this case for an int array, we will create an int called j to hold the value of the current position each iteration of the loop. And then we will put dots and the name of the array we're looping, x. Now I will output each position in the array as the loop loops through each position. I will just write j. Each time the loop runs, it will get the current position in the array. Let's say the first time it will be 77, second time 34, then 55, then 67, etc, etc, until the end of the loop. Doesn't matter how many items you have. That's why it's so useful. You can loop a huge loop with just this line of code. This is much easier to write than writing all of this. So that's another way to loop an array. Let's go over it again. As I said, we use j to hold the current value of the position in the array we're looping. So first time 77, 34, 55, etc, etc. Let's see it. Let's output it to the console. As you can see, 77, 34, 55. Here you see the separator separating the previous loop, so we can visually separate it. So yeah, as you can see, this syntax is much easier to use than this one, and it does the same thing. I just wanted to show you both ways of doing it, because you'll sometimes run into this, sometimes you'll run into this, and for sometimes you will want using this rather than using this. Now let's loop the second array, the string array. Why? It has a bit more elements inside of it, more values than this one, but we do this the same. We write for, and inside the for's argument we'll create a string y. We'll call it s because it's a string array. We are looping a string array, so we want the variable holding each value to be the same type. In this case it's a string, so we need a string variable to hold the current value, the array loop, so we called it s, and then we'll have the 2 dots and we'll write y, the name of our array. And now we will copy this and we will replace the j with s. Let's run it, and you will see after the numbers loop, it loops the string array abc, foobar, 555x, etc, etc. This is not an int. If you remember, a string can hold any character or number your keyboard has. So yeah, as you've seen, we looped 2 arrays very simply, very fast. It would have been much slower to write both of these if I used this syntax, but they're both usable. I just wanted to show you this way of doing things, and that's it. It's nothing complicated. You get data and you loop it. This is useful for cases where you get data from a database, which is the most common example for this. And that's it for this lesson. If you don't understand anything, please contact me via the Q&A